Welcome to part 6 of the full lawsuit readout. Let's get right back into it where we left off. There were also numerous instances where Koberger would block the door and trap female graduate students in their on-campus student offices for long periods of time. In one instance, a WSU professor heard a female graduate student say, "I really need to get out of here," and the professor intervened by going to the office to allow the female student to leave. One female graduate student reported that Koberger would trap her in her office, and then he would try to talk to her about the Ted Bundy murders. Some WSU graduate students would try to keep their on-campus office doors closed in order to keep Koberger out, yet other WSU graduate students would keep their office doors open as a place of refuge for others in the event that Koberger was present. Koberger was perceived by female classmates as dominant and sexist, and was disrespectful to female instructors. Koberger's co-workers in the WSU criminal justice program believed that he was an, quote, incel or involuntary celibate and was sexually frustrated. By September 2022, Koberger had developed a reputation at WSU for, quote, being a dick, end quote. Koberger also developed a reputation at WSU for being very homophobic. Koberger would pick fights with other WSU classmates, and his arguments would leave the class upset. Koberger was described as, quote, very angry, as if he had built up a fury or rage. Koberger tended to be aggressive when interacting with female colleagues and would get agitated, argumentative, and confrontational during class instruction, as well as out of the classroom, often prompting other classmates to intervene. In one instance that occurred during the first few weeks of the semester, a confrontation with Koberger made a female student so upset that she fled the classroom in tears during the middle of class, leaving her possessions behind. Professors in the WSU graduate program were aware of the incident at the time that it occurred. The student later filed a complaint against Koberger with the WSU CCR office. The student filed this complaint with the goal of creating documentation of the incident should further issues arise with Koberger. Koberger was supposedly spoken to about his inappropriate behavior, but nothing further was done about this incident. Koberger's female classmates kept a board with a running tally of his behaviors in female instructor-led classes versus male instructor-led classes, as well as documenting his discriminatory comments and behaviors with colleagues and instances of aggressively staring at students. During one particular class, Koberger stared at a female student 9 times. WSU professors were aware of this tally board concerning Koberger's behavior. In one incident, Koberger and a female WSU graduate student were alone in a classroom, and Koberger physically blocked her from leaving the room. In another incident, Koberger asked out a fellow WSU staff member who rejected his advance, and then he followed her outside to her car. That WSU staff member told another female WSU graduate student that Koberger had been stalking her. This resulted in another report being filed with WSU's CCR office. Colleagues in the WSU criminal justice program also were aware that undergraduate students were uncomfortable around Koberger. Koberger's office mate, a fellow WSU teaching assistant for the criminology program, was aware that Koberger attempted to use his authority as a TA to inappropriately interact with female students. The office mate thought that Koberger wanted a girlfriend and would frequently talk about his desire for a girlfriend. A 19-year-old WSU sophomore first met Koberger when he came to her student office. Shortly thereafter, Koberger started coming to her office nearly every day to talk. Koberger's office was located in a different part of the building, and he did not have a particular reason to be in the area of the sophomore's office. The topics of his conversations became more personal rather than focused on his studies or work as a WSU teaching assistant. The sophomore would try to focus on her work, but Koberger would remain in her office whether or not she interacted with him. She described her interactions with Koberger as uncomfortable. On one occasion, the sophomore returned to her office to find Koberger inside. She told him that she was closing the office, and he followed her outside. Koberger then asked if she wanted to get coffee, but the sophomore declined and stated that her girlfriend was coming to pick her up. The sophomore told her bosses at WSU about the incident. In response, they told her that she should not be alone with Koberger and suggested that she have campus security escort her out. Her bosses at WSU also told the sophomore that she was not the first to report such problems about Koberger. Koberger continued to come to the sophomore's campus office when she was alone. On another occasion, Koberger stood directly behind the sophomore's chair as she was working. He stood directly behind her for a while and did not move until another WSU advisor came into the room. The sophomore was told that WSU staff had talked to Koberger as many as 5 times about his inappropriate behavior. When she would see Koberger in the hallway, he would physically corner her and attempt to force a conversation, even though the sophomore tried not to engage. The sophomore found the experiences to be, quote, scary, especially when she was alone. The sophomore thought it was strange that Koberger seemed to know her schedule and would intentionally encounter her. In another incident, the sophomore saw Koberger walking outside as she was locking up her campus office. Koberger made eye contact with the sophomore through the window, as if he was looking for her in anticipation, and then he entered the office building. In order to avoid contact with Koberger, the panicked sophomore fled into the bathroom to hide. She hid out of instinct due to how uncomfortable contact with Koberger had become. Out of concerns over Koberger, the sophomore's boss at WSU would occasionally take her home so that she would not have to walk by herself or take public transportation. The sophomore became concerned about how many precautions needed to be taken because of Koberger's behavior. In another incident, the sophomore's neighbor informed her that someone was lurking outside the window of her residence and warned her to lock the door. She later learned that Koberger lived nearby. Koberger's supervising instructor at WSU was aware that the sophomore had made complaints about Koberger's behavior. Another female undergraduate student who attended a class where Koberger was the assigned teaching assistant reported that he always seemed to be staring at her when she would look up. She also noted that Koberger would intentionally leave the class at the same time as her and follow her to her car. Later, that student learned that Koberger had photos of her and her female classmates on his cell phone. A WSU employee who was assigned to work with Koberger began receiving complaints in late August 2022 from students and staff in the criminal justice program about Koberger's inappropriate behavior. Because of these complaints, the WSU employees spent a lot of time, at least once a week, speaking about Koberger during different disciplinary meetings. These meetings focused on Koberger's interactions with fellow graduate students, in and out of the classroom, along with his behavior around some of the criminal justice professors. The various complaints included outspoken discriminatory comments, which were homophobic, ableist, xenophobic, and misogynistic in nature. Other complaints included that Koberger would stare at people and stand uncomfortably close or lean over women, making them uncomfortable. As a result of the complaints, the WSU employee brought Koberger to her office to talk about the complaints and attempt to get him to correct his behavior, but Koberger deflected personal responsibility. On more than one occasion, WSU employees would stay in a room where Koberger was engaging with a WSU colleague out of concern that the colleague should not be left alone with Koberger. In one instance, a WSU employee told the colleague to email her with the subject heading 911 if she needed help. Another WSU professor was asked by WSU staff to check in on another colleague because Koberger had been harassing her. A fellow female WSU graduate student was asked by WSU to start keeping track of Koberger's behavior toward her. The student had already made an informal report about Koberger to WSU, but she did not like the way WSU responded because she felt that they would not adequately protect her from retaliation. The student continued to report her experiences with Koberger to WSU, including to the program chair and other professors, and reported that Koberger's actions made her feel unsafe. Another fellow female WSU graduate student made multiple complaints to WSU about Koberger's behavior. She was directed to copy her complaints to another WSU department, but she was reluctant to do so because she had bad experiences with that in the past. As early as mid-September 2022, WSU professors were discussing the, quote, need to do an intervention with Koberger because, quote, he's offended several of our female students. One asked, quote, how do you want to handle this? Another WSU professor responded, let's see when we have more info. Around September or October 2022, a fellow WSU graduate teaching assistant was asked to monitor Koberger's behavior because others at WSU wanted to track it. The teaching assistant was instructed to write down anything she saw and notify WSU staff. It was discussed that WSU could not give Koberger a PhD and the resulting authority that could give him, out of concern over his inappropriate behavior. Also, around September or October 2022, a female graduate student came to a WSU professor to report that someone had broken into her apartment and stolen intimate items, such as perfume and underwear, and that the student was very scared. That WSU professor also believed that Koberger was stalking people. In another incident, Koberger got into an argument with his WSU mentor and supervising instructor, for whom he also served as a teaching assistant. This argument escalated to the point of shouting, and the instructor telling Koberger to leave his office. Koberger refused to leave the instructor's office, causing the instructor to leave his own office. It was common for Koberger to prevent his mentor and instructor from leaving his office, which the mentor believed was Koberger, quote, power tripping to exert control. Koberger was also known to make unwanted advances to a female employee of the WSU bookstore. A male bookstore coworker would attempt to intervene to prevent Koberger from interacting with the female employee. The female employee was unsettled that Koberger knew her name, even though she did not wear a name tag and had not told him her name. It also seemed to the female employee that Koberger knew what hours she worked, and he would make remarks about her schedule. One evening, the female employee was home alone and changing in her bedroom when someone knocked on her window. She called her husband to come home from work. On another occasion, she heard someone on her porch in the evening. Her husband came home again and saw a white car leaving the area. Koberger drove a white car. Both occurrences were in August or September 2022. A WSU employee whose duties include investigating and providing education, mediation, and other disciplinary-focused responses to complaints or reports made by members of the student body, especially complaints that have a discriminatory nexus, stated that she never interacted with Koberger, but admitted that she had received 13 reports highlighting concerns regarding his behavior. One fellow female WSU graduate student reported that the way Koberger spoke to females in the department was unsettling to them, and that she had never met anyone that acted in such a condescending manner as Koberger. She wondered why people in power in the WSU Criminal Justice Department did not address his behavior. On November 2nd, 2022, WSU put Koberger on a brief, vague, and non-specific 4-point improvement plan due to his inappropriate behavior, but that plan set no specific goals. Now, they have a screenshot of this plan, and it states that the plan was to 1, meet weekly with supervisor at established meeting time, 2, keep track of weekly hours and provide support to supervisor, 3, establish weekly goals with supervisor and discuss whether previous week's goals were met during each weekly meeting, and 4, make sure weekly goals are progressively harder to ensure progress throughout the rest of the semester. So those were the 4 points that were made. On Tuesday, November 8th, 2022, WSU conducted a remedial mandatory discrimination and harassment training for all graduate students due to Koberger's inappropriate behavior. During Koberger's attendance at this training, WSU staff observed him sitting at the back of the room with his hands behind his head and staring at the ceiling. The graduate students knew that the discrimination and harassment training was specifically due to Koberger's behavior. The November 8th, 2022 discrimination and harassment training embarrassed Koberger in front of his entire cohort, something that Waiver 21 specifically advised against and warned that in a campus setting, problematic individuals are most likely to become violent in the days following a shameful or rejecting event, such as a reprimand. That's going to end part 6 for right now, and I will see you in part 7, where we will pick up right where we've left off